Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I am your host, Chris Angle. Thanks for joining us. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to analyze concepts in current media. With me is my co-host and discussant, Rick Samuelson. Rick is a venture capitalist from the West Coast and graduated from Yale. And thanks for coming, Rick. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
The discussion for today is why governments throughout the world really tend to move left. That is, to a direction that is away from individual freedom. So let's discuss. First, I'd like to bring up a chart to begin the discussion. Why the governments throughout the world gradually move to the left. They can only move right during a revolution. In order to understand this thesis that I'm about to make, we must make an analysis of the nature of a decision. A decision is to make a sacrifice to achieve a reward. And therefore we can say a sacrifice equals a reward. Make it an equation. The nature of a sacrifice is that the risk and the information and knowledge of one in one's being, and its time and its effort, and sometimes material, because you possess materials at sometimes. And we're going to abbreviate that as RITE, and we'll put in parentheses M to stand for the material. So we sacrifice our risk and our knowledge, our time and our effort, and sometimes material, to make a sacrifice. A decision is the effectuation of a sacrifice, which is from the consideration of the sacrifice versus the reward ratio, which is the priority of the subject matter. For example, you go down to the local drugstore and you buy some toothpaste. Well, you sacrifice your time and effort and use your information and knowledge in an atmosphere of risk to produce something for which you get money. And this allows you to buy the toothpaste, which is the reward. And the reward is a clean mouth for as long as the toothpaste lasts, and that fulfills the priority of having a clean mouth. So now we need to analyze one thing that occurs in a sacrifice, especially in a sacrifice that involves other people. In other words, when you go to work, often you not only work by yourself, but you also work with other people. And thus, cooperation comes into play. And when we decide to cooperate with another person to effectuate a reward, there emerges two risk-reward equations, one for yourself and one for the other. Person A decides to commit to a sacrifice to achieve a reward, and person B decides to commit to the same sacrifice to achieve generally the same reward. And we do this because it's more efficient. And because it's efficient, we establish that it is a priority of ours to cooperate, to produce the sacrifice, to obtain the reward. And that priority is a piece of knowledge. And it's the knowledge that if we work together, we'll be more efficient, and the greater will be our reward. And thus, we make the decision to add to our life the risk and the information, the time and the effort and our material to go out and make a cooperative sacrifice to get a reward. Now, when we cooperate with somebody, cooperation is an important ingredient of ethics, and we produce and we cooperate in order to produce, to bring ourselves goodness in our lives, and we are able to effectuate this cooperation through respect. Respect is behavior that reduces tension when we cooperate together with other people, such as an employer and an employee. The employer pays the employee for his sacrifice and pays money for that, and that is a demonstration of how the employer respects the employee, because the employee sacrifices his time and effort and receives money from the employer. The work and the effort, for the work and the effort, which is also an employee's respect for the employer. Now, let's apply this. In governments, generally, throughout the world, we have the left, the liberal left, versus the conservative right. And the essence of the left needs government to solve the problems of its constituents. Government is required to solve the problems of its constituents because the left feels that the government is required to solve the problems of the individuals. Whereas the right, the essence of the right, believes that individuals, and it believes in the individuals to solve their own problems first and foremost before going up the ladder to see if government will solve it. In other words, if an individual cannot solve it, let us say that problem is self-defense, then the government steps in because the individual contracts with the government to solve this problem that it cannot do by itself. So the difference is that the right starts with the individual and the left starts at the other end of the problem-solving techniques on the government side. Why is this? Well, that's because the left considers the other person to be inherently bad and the other person cannot be trusted. Therefore, its constituents need government to regulate them. Whereas the right, or the conservatives, believe that the individual is inherently good and is to be trusted until otherwise noted or otherwise shown to be bad. So the inherent assumption is polar opposites for the conservative and for the liberals. Now the conservatives, because they believe that others can be trusted and cooperation comes easily, therefore the use of respect of the individual comes easily to the conservative. And so in conservative politics, when you make political deals, cooperation is easily given from the conservatives. And they want to cooperate and trust the left. And they'll readily compromise. And when they do, when they compromise to the left, the government moves left. For example, welfare gets bigger little by little. The budget gets bigger little by little. The deficits get bigger little by little. All of government inexorably gets larger little by little as the conservatives compromise with the liberals. But liberals, on the other hand, they don't trust the right. They do not make deals with the right. If they do make political deals, they tend to break them. One last set of comments on this. The right negotiates from a present position because of his will to cooperate. And the left negotiates from the position of need for total government control because the other individual is inherently bad and cannot be trusted. Therefore, the government must command control and regulate in order to protect the victimized individual. And why is that? Why do we have these two points of view? Well, the right has ethics in its modus operandi. In other words, it's the ethics of cooperation and respect is the way that the conservative tends to operate. On the left, they believe only in that the end, which is the government, justifies the means, which is the individual behaving according to the government's regulations. So the right uses cooperation as its modus operandi, and the left doesn't tend to be cooperative. And from this, the cooperation, thus the right will tend to follow the Constitution strictly because it wants to cooperate with what is written inside the Constitution. It is a contract, and thus the conservative wants to uphold that contract, and it feels that the rights remain with the people. On the left, they interpret the Constitution according to its present social needs. Really, as the left considers the Constitution really malleable according to its needs and the ends to those results that it wants to achieve. Rights remain with the government, and the government protects the people because the people cannot protect themselves. They are victims of the that is, the capitalists. Well, enough of me talking. Let's involve Rick and see what he has to say. Rick, do governments tend to become more liberal and larger, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world? Is that a correct starting statement?
Well, I think if you look at government debt to GDP trends, if you look at the number of employees as a percentage of total workers or union workers, if you look at just the gross level of government expenditures across a number of countries, more particularly the United States over time, it's pretty hard to argue that the Leviathan continues to grow. But I think there's also a great enabler in all of this. To some extent, we are victims economically of our own success. That the public expects entitlements, more particularly, to continue growing, whether it's food stamps or disability or what have you, health care, is partly a function of the fact that Western economies have delivered sustained improvements in standards of living. And I'm talking about the material goods, the lifespans, the health care, and so forth, that an increasing number of the world's citizens have access to. I mean, these trends, the incidence of disease, all these trends have moved rather positively, and ironically, it has raised expectations of ever greater entitlement rewards. And so, the one way that you see on occasion these trends reversed is when the economy stumbles extremely badly. If you harken back to the days of Jimmy Carter, when inflation was high double digit, interest rates spiked soon after Reagan came into office in order to control inflation. A lot of bad things were happening economically, and you saw the country shift right, at least temporarily. A lot of the programs were rolled back, that, at least to some extent, even though under Clinton and subsequent presidents, they continued to grow thereafter. So I'm of the belief that the extraordinary performance of Western economies has been a great enabler in this trend, actually.
Right. As the economies become more efficient and produce more, the governments can take more.
Absolutely, and do.
And do. You use the word entitlements. Is that a substitute word for welfare?
Yeah, but it's even broader than that. You know, Obamacare is a type of entitlement. It's going to be very costly, like all the other entitlements. We're just seeing the beginnings of that. I mean, anytime you give away health care to, what, 35 million people, it's going to be an added cost that's got to be paid for somehow, ultimately, or borrowed. And the United States government is doing a combination of both.
Okay, so we've pretty much concluded that welfare or entitlements are gaining steam and becoming a larger part of the U.S. government and really of our economy as the dollar amounts increase.
And I would add that the cost of restraining expenditure has gone down dramatically ever since the central banks of the world, beginning in the United States, of course, have adopted a policy of near zero interest rates. And so the cost of government borrowing is, you know, very modest. And therefore, why not borrow? And that's what's happening.
Right, and doesn't one of the chief enablers the Federal Reserve? Aren't they the ones that buy much of the debt?
Yep. Exhibit number one.
Right.
The other central banks are following suit. I mean, nobody has shown particular prudence in this regard. Maybe the Swiss central bank is slightly less bad as an offender than others, but you know, the exceptions are few and far between.
Are entitlements, in this growing sense of, well, not sense, but in growing reality of entitlements in the production of the government, is it good for America?
Well, if you're of the view, my view, frankly, that there is no multiplier effect, that this whole Keynesian notion that government expenditure is just like private expenditure, you know, it's just a different source of consumption and can boost the economy in and of itself. If you're of my view, and I'm not alone in this, that every dollar you take out of pockets of the taxpayer actually detracts from the potential growth of the economy, and therefore is suboptimal, then you have to conclude that it's no surprise that world economies, at least the developed markets, are showing ever more tepid growth trends as the governments grow. And that's demonstrable.
Right.
Even with a zero interest rate environment.
So you think the entitlement situation of not only the U.S. but governments throughout the world are influencing the GDP production and wealth of the nations?
Well, it's absolutely measurable. As of June, the labor participation rate in the United States was the lowest. It was 62 point something percent. That's been since October 1976. So, whatever they say about the unemployment rate, I know Wall Street and the Fed continue to point to the quote-unquote unemployment rate improving. In real terms, in terms of the number of people who are actually working, we are worse off. We are the worst off we've been since 1976. That's a pretty long time.
Yeah. Now you made a comment about the Federal Reserve buying the debt at low interest rates. Is that going to cause inflation sometime soon? What do you think? Kind of a difficult question, actually. And I'm sorry to put you right there on the spot, but thought it was since it came up, I thought it was kind of important that we touch on this issue.
Well, I like the unemployment number. The CPI is a very carefully managed number. I'm not suggesting that inflation is runaway at the moment, but there are signals that inflation for certain types of products and services is actually much higher than captured in the CPI. I'll give you an example. Consider student loans and student loan default.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
It was just reported that student loan defaults have risen to 17%. Okay. Now that's defined by the government as not paying a student's loan for a year. No business is defined a default after non-payment of a year, right? That's too long. The actual default rate may be closer to 25 or 30% if you adjust it for that. Now, why are student defaults rising so rapidly if the cost of a college education is sustainable for the average middle-class family? In other words, what you have
you said unsustainable.
The cost of education, sorry.
You said unsustainable?
No, if it's sustainable, if the cost of paying for college education is sustainable, how is it possible that these defaults are rising so rapidly? What it implies is that the inflation in the cost of college is running way ahead of the rise in compensation or salaries or wages or whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
But that inflation is not captured because it's not part of the CPI.
Right. It's not a commodity. It's not a common product that is counted in the CPI figures. Okay.
Right. And the impact of it is softened because the government has aggressively taken over since Obama took office the whole student loan administration, right? So it's now routed straight through the government balance sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, because the government has this zero interest rate policy combined with the fact that it's awarding more loans than ever, you have this remarkable situation where colleges are able to carry on increasing costs, and the only signal we're getting that something's going awry is default rates are starting to rise dramatically.
Okay. One more topic that I'd like to touch upon before we conclude for the day is the association of welfare and illegal immigration. Is this a reason why so many are coming over the open border to the south? If we had no welfare, would still we have the flood of immigrants coming from the south? Does one enable the other? Do you have anything on that?
I don't have any hard data on that. Frankly, if you were to open the border completely, you would see many more millions coming across just because life is better here than it is in all of South America, frankly. I mean, the numbers that aren't coming from Mexico would be coming from Brazil, for example, because Brazil, the Brazilian economy is doing very poorly at the moment. So there's almost no limit to the appetite for immigration in the United States, irrespective of whether there's welfare or not. What's kind of shocking is that since 2008, a net increase in jobs of only 3.2 million has been generated by the entire United States. Now think about that. We give away 1 million green cards every year and have done so throughout Obama's administration and before, under Bush as well. And yet we've only generated net 3.2 million jobs. In other words, we have given away vastly more green cards than we've created jobs.
And what was that time period?
Green cards are not employed.
What was that time period for the 3.2 million?
That's 2008 to mid-2015.
And 1 million are given away every year.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's no attempt whatsoever to match job increases with the award of legal status, right? Green card status. There's no attempt at all.
Very interesting.
And by the way, we've graduated over 3 million college graduates every year in that period.
Wow.
So
Okay.
what are they doing?
Rick, we're out of time, and I want to thank you for participating as always. And I want to thank everybody for being here at the Philosophical Angle. See you next week.
Thank you.